HOA Karen's pool party plans ruined. When I locked my pool, watch her desperate struggle. It was supposed to be her perfect party, 50 guests, music, food, and my pool. But there was one small problem. I locked the gate, and the key was in my hand. I watched her panic, her eyes, wide with disbelief, growing more frantic with every passing minute. She tried everything, begging, yelling, calling for help. But no one could save her now. What happened next would leave everyone speechless. Welcome to HOA Secrets Uncovered, where we dive into the wildest, most dramatic HOA stories. I'm Mark. I live right here in this quiet little suburban neighborhood, just a stone's throw away from where all the chaos unfolds. I'm just a regular guy, but sometimes the HOA board can turn your life upside down. Let me tell you what happened when Karen, the HOA president, decided she was going to take over my brand new pool, and how it all went terribly wrong for her. I'll never forget the day Karen thought she could take over my pool. The day she underestimated me. You see, our neighborhood, like many suburban areas, is quiet, peaceful. Almost too peaceful sometimes, a little too perfect if you ask me. The HOA runs everything here. They have rules for everything. What color your mailbox should be, how tall your grass can grow, even the exact angle your driveway should have to be considered proper. And then there's Karen. She's the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, the one who believes she's in charge of every little detail of our lives. She walks around like she owns the entire block, dictating rules and handing out fines as if it's her personal job to keep us all in line. But that day, she pushed me too far. She sent out an invitation to every single person in the neighborhood, and I was one of them. Pool party at my place, it said. 50 guests. Well, music, food, fun. Don't miss it. At first I thought, okay, whatever. I didn't really care about her party. After all, I had my own plans for the day. But then I realized the party was happening at my pool. Yes, my pool. You see, I'd spent weeks working on it, making sure everything was perfect. I'd saved up for months just to put in this pool. It was a luxury for me. A little slice of peace and tranquility in my backyard. The idea of Karen throwing a party in my pool, inviting all those people and making it feel like she owned the place, didn't sit well with me. So I decided to do something about it. I locked the gate. Simple, right? Just locked it, like anyone would do to protect something valuable. But it wasn't just any lock. I made sure it was the kind of lock that couldn't be easily picked. And then I waited. I watched from my living room window as Karen and her guests started arriving. They were laughing, chatting, completely unaware of what was coming. I saw Karen's face light up when she spotted the pool. She was giddy, ready to host her so-called perfect pool party. She waved at everyone and started leading them towards the gate. But then something strange happened. She tried to open the gate, and it didn't budge. Her hand grabbed the handle, twisted it. Nothing. She pulled harder, her frustration starting to show. I could see her face turn red as she tried again, and again. Nothing. That's when the panic started to set in. I watched her through the window, barely able to hold back my smirk. She stepped back, looked around, and started pacing. She called someone, probably a friend or a neighbor. She pulled out her phone and started texting frantically. But the gate wouldn't open. Her guests started to gather around, clueless as to what was going on. Some of them started looking around, clearly confused. She knocked on my door, but I just stood there. I wasn't going to give in that easily. She knocked again, louder this time, and then came the yelling. "Come on! "Open up!" she shouted. Her voice was sharp, demanding. I could hear the anger in her tone. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered how she had bossed everyone around, how she'd tried to control every little detail of this neighborhood, how she'd given me a fine for having my mailbox a few inches too high. She didn't deserve my sympathy. I stood there, watching her struggle, my hand on the lock, knowing she had no idea what she was up against. The longer she tried, the more desperate she became. She started shouting at her guests, ordering them to do something. Some of them seemed to leave, annoyed. Others just stood there, unsure of what was happening. And then, she did something I wasn't expecting. She called the HOA. Of course she did. She was the president, after all. She probably thought that calling her own board would solve everything. But this time, there was no board to back her up. I heard her voice over the phone, trying to explain the situation. Her words were almost a blur, but I could hear the frustration. I almost felt bad for her, until I remembered why I had locked the gate in the first place. This was her payback for all the power trips. But then something happened that I didn't expect. One of her guests, someone I had never seen before, started to climb the gate. What the heck? I couldn't believe my eyes. This person actually tried to climb the locked gate to get in. I thought to myself, is this really happening? I was watching, stunned, as someone tried to break into my property for Karen. And then a thought crossed my mind. What if Karen had crossed a line this time? What if this was more than just a pool party? What if, just maybe, I was about to turn the tables in a way she'd never expect? What would happen next? Was it just petty revenge? Or was something more serious about to unfold? I couldn't take my eyes off the chaos unfolding outside my window. Karen was still trying to figure out how to get into my pool, but now she was more desperate than ever. The guests she had invited were starting to murmur among themselves. Some of them were clearly uncomfortable, while others, probably her closest friends, were still standing by, pretending like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. This wasn't just a little hiccup. This was an unraveling. I knew it. She knew it. And now, everyone in the neighborhood was about to see exactly what happened when the HOA president got a taste of her own medicine. There's something about seeing a powerful person squirm that brings a sense of satisfaction. It's like watching a bully get their comeuppance. But what happened next? Well, that's when things took a turn I wasn't expecting. You see, Karen wasn't just frustrated anymore. She was furious. Her eyes flicked from the gate to her guests, her voice getting louder with every passing second. Someone needs to do something about this. She wasn't just yelling at me anymore. She was yelling at everyone around her, as if they should fix this problem for her. But no one moved. That's when I saw it. A shadow moved towards the back of the house. A figure. I couldn't believe it at first. It was the neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, the old guy who lived next door to me. He was in his late 70s, and no one ever saw him much. His house was always quiet, and when he did come outside, it was only for a short time. He was the kind of guy who kept to himself. But there he was, walking towards the pool gate like he had a purpose. I watched as he took a long look at Karen, then at the pool gate, then back to Karen. "I thought you were in charge of this place," Mr. Jenkins said, his voice dry and calm. Karen didn't know what to say. "Come on, Jenkins," she spat, clearly angry. "Open the damn gate. We're all waiting for this party." Mr. Jenkins just stood there, his hands in his pockets, shaking his head slowly. "Not my problem," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Karen's face twisted with rage. "What are you talking about? This is your neighborhood too. You should help me get this gate open." But Mr. Jenkins wasn't fazed. Instead, he took a step back and said, "I didn't sign up to be part of any circus." The words hung in the air for a moment. I was stunned. What was he doing? Why wasn't he helping her? The situation was getting worse for Karen. She turned back to the pool gate and tried pulling again. She was putting so much force into it now, I half expected her to break the entire gate. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She wasn't looking at anyone, really. She was too busy trying to save face, trying to look in control. But we all knew the truth. She had no control. And that's when it happened. A loud snap. The lock, my carefully chosen, perfectly placed lock, broke. At first, I thought maybe it was the wind or something, but when I looked outside, I saw the gate was slightly ajar. Karen stopped, her eyes widening. She had done it. But it wasn't because of any of her guests. No, it was because Mr. Jenkins had helped her. Not physically, though. He had done something far worse. While Karen was busy distracting everyone, he'd quietly slipped something in the lock. A simple little device. A piece of metal that fit into the lock's mechanism. It was a bypass tool. I stared at Mr. Jenkins in disbelief. He wasn't the quiet old guy I had thought him to be. He was sneaky, clever, and he had just given Karen exactly what she wanted. But now, the gate was open, and Karen didn't even know what to do with it. She froze in front of the gate as if she couldn't believe. It had finally happened. Her guests slowly moved forward, but Karen was too shocked to even speak. She was looking at the open gate like she was seeing it for the first time. For a moment, the silence was deafening. Then, Karen stepped forward and slowly pushed the gate open. Her smile came back, but it was strained. "I knew it would work out," she said, almost to herself. But something about the way she said it didn't feel right. Her guests started to file into the pool area finally, but the tension was palpable. You could feel the undercurrent of discomfort. No one was talking anymore. They were just quietly walking around, unsure of what had just happened. And then Karen turned to me. I was still standing inside, staring at the situation unfold. "You think this is over?" she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "You've made a huge mistake. You don't even realize how bad this is for you." I couldn't help it. A grin spread across my face. "You sure about that, Karen?" I asked. "Because I'm starting to think this is just the beginning." Her eyes flashed with fury. "You'll regret this. You're gonna pay for what you've done." I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. It wasn't just the fact that she had finally gotten into my pool. It wasn't just that she thought she had won. It was the way she was trying to regain control. But I had a feeling this wasn't the end of it. And somehow, I was certain that she didn't realize just how far she'd pushed me. Maybe it was her turn to regret crossing the line. But what would she do next? Was this just a small victory for her? Or was something bigger about to unfold? And who would truly come out on top in the end? The party had started, but something felt off. The atmosphere was thick with tension, even though the pool was now filled with people. Karen had gotten what she wanted, but I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't happy. She had that look of a person who thought they'd won, but didn't realize they were already losing. I watched from the safety of my living room, the curtains pulled back just enough to get a perfect view. Karen was mingling with her guests, but there was no laughter, no fun. Instead, there were hushed conversations, awkward glances, and more than one confused stare towards the locked gate. That's when it hit me. Karen wasn't just throwing a pool party. She was making a statement. She wasn't just in my pool, she was rubbing it in my face. She was showing me, no, showing everyone, that she had power. But the truth was, she wasn't in control. I was. And I had just set the stage for something much bigger than any of us could have imagined. It wasn't just about the gate anymore. It wasn't just about her invading my personal space. No, this was about something much deeper. It was about the power dynamics. It was about who controlled this neighborhood. And let me tell you, Karen didn't stand a chance. But I wasn't going to go in guns blazing. Oh no, I was going to play this carefully. I watched as she tried to entertain her guests, but the entire time, she kept glancing at the gate. I could see the unease building up in her. She kept shifting from one foot to the other, clearly distracted. Why? Because she knew that I still had the power. She didn't realize it yet, but every little thing I did from now on would make her feel more and more helpless. As the hours passed, the party dragged on. I could hear the faint music in the background, but it wasn't the same. The usual lively tunes had been replaced by something quieter, more subdued. That's when I decided to do something subtle, but incredibly effective. I knew Karen would be watching. She always did. I walked to my front yard and, casually, I started trimming the bushes that lined the fence separating my property from hers. The thing about Karen was that she had always been a stickler for rules. If the grass was half an inch too high, she'd be on it with a fine. If the flowers weren't in perfect alignment, she'd call an emergency HOA meeting. She was a walking codebook, and it made her unbearable to live near. But here's where I had the upper hand. My yard was immaculate. And while she was busy at her party, I decided to send her a little reminder of who was in charge here. I didn't just trim the bushes, I shaped them. I made sure they were a perfect shape, one that was sure to catch her eye. I placed one bush right at the spot where her guests were sitting, blocking their view. It wasn't drastic, just enough to make her uncomfortable. But I knew it would bug her. I knew it would bug her so much. I was right. The next thing I knew, I saw Karen storming out of her party, her heels clicking loudly against the pavement. "Excuse me," she yelled, her voice high-pitched with annoyance. "What is this?" Her guests turned to look at her, but she wasn't paying attention to them. She was staring at my perfectly trimmed bush. It was subtle. No one else noticed it, but to her, it was like a slap in the face. She marched right up to the fence, hands on her hips, and I could see the steam coming from her ears. "Who did this?" she demanded, glaring at my yard. She didn't know it was me. She didn't know that I was standing just inside my door, watching her every move. But I could see her frustration building. She turned around and marched back to her guests, but her composure was completely gone. She was no longer the queen of the block. She was just a woman, desperate to regain control. But that wasn't the end of it. Oh no. I knew she would retaliate. She would find a way to turn the tables. And so I waited. But as the night wore on, something unexpected happened. Karen's guests began to trickle out. The music faded, and the atmosphere became more and more awkward. And then I saw it. Karen was standing at the edge of the pool, alone. Her face, once smug and full of confidence, was now pale. She was staring at the empty pool, her guests long gone. That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't just about my pool. It wasn't just about petty revenge. Karen had nothing left. She was alone. She had tried to take over my space, my property, my life, and now she was left with nothing. And that's when I decided it was time to deliver the final blow. I walked outside, casually, like nothing had happened. I passed by the gate and gave it a light push, just enough to make it creak. Karen turned around, and for a moment she looked like a deer caught in headlights. I smiled. "Seems like your party didn't go quite as planned, huh?" I said, my voice smooth, calm. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She stood there, frozen. And just like that, I knew I had won. But the question is, did Karen finally learn her lesson? Or was she just planning her next move? What do you think she's going to do now that everything is out of her control? The next morning, I woke up to the sound of an unusual quiet. No chirping birds, no cars passing by, just silence. But something felt off. I walked to my window and peeked through the blinds. The neighborhood looked almost too peaceful, like nothing had happened the night before. But I knew better. Karen had been humiliated. Her perfect pool party had turned into a disaster, and I could feel it, the calm before the storm. I didn't know exactly what she was planning, but I could tell it wasn't going to end here. And that's when I heard the knock on my door. It was a soft tap at first, too soft, like she was trying to pretend she wasn't there. But the second knock? That one was loud and demanding. I didn't even need to look out the peephole to know who it was. Karen. I wasn't sure if I should be amused or worried. But one thing was for sure. She wasn't going to let this go. I opened the door slowly, just enough to peek my head out. There she was, standing there in her typical HOA president attire, dark sunglasses, perfectly pressed blouse, and that smug smile that made me want to roll my eyes. Her arms were crossed over her chest. "Good morning," she said, her tone sugary sweet. Too sweet. I didn't trust it. I didn't respond immediately. I just stared at her, waiting. She smiled wider, obviously not getting the hint that I wasn't in the mood. "I'm here to discuss the situation with my pool party," she said, her voice now dripping with thinly veiled venom. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really?" Her smile faltered for just a second, but she quickly regained composure. "You see, there were some issues with the event," she continued, "and I think it's time we had a proper discussion about the pool, the fence, and, of course, your blatant disregard for the HOA's rules." I could barely contain my laughter. The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. She was standing here, lecturing me about rules, after trying to take over my pool with 50 people and throwing the whole neighborhood into chaos. But I stayed calm, leaning against the doorframe, pretending to listen. "I'll be honest," she went on. "I expected better from a neighbor. I've already spoken to the HOA about your actions." "Actions?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Yes," she said, her voice getting colder. "You violated several community guidelines, namely, obstructing access to the common areas and tampering with my event. And for that, I believe there will be consequence." Yes. I was getting tired of her games. "What kind of consequences?" I asked, a smirk playing at the corner of my lips. "You'll see," she said, turning sharply. "But don't think you've won, not by a long shot." Before I could say anything else, she walked away with that same smug smile, as if she had everything under control. I watched her retreat down the street, but I knew she was planning something. The wheels were turning in her head, and I could already feel the storm coming. But this time, I wasn't going to play by her rules. The more I thought about it, the more I realized Karen's whole life was about control. She used the HOA to manipulate the neighbors, punish those who didn't follow her so-called perfect order. But what happened at my pool? That was a crack in her facade. And I wasn't going to let her off the hook. So I decided to turn the tables. That afternoon, I went to the HOA's official website and found their contact information. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for Karen to make her next move. I was going to take action. I sent an email. A simple one, but to the point. It outlined the event at my pool, the unsanctioned party, and Karen's violation of the HOA's own rules. I even included a little tidbit about how she had coaxed Mr. Jenkins into tampering with the gate lock the night of the party. I hit send, my heart racing a little. This was it. I knew it was risky, but I wasn't about to let her walk all over me. The email was just the beginning. A few hours later, I got a response. It was from the HOA board. The message was short, but it was clear. We've reviewed the situation. A meeting has been scheduled to discuss the recent events. Your input has been noted. I almost laughed out loud. I had just sent a bombshell to the HOA, and Karen had no idea. Now, it wasn't just her party at risk. It was her position as the HOA president. I knew Karen would come after me with everything she had. But this was a power move she couldn't ignore. It was time to play her game and win. But as I sat back in my chair, staring at the email, one thought kept gnawing at the back of my mind. What if she had already set a trap for me? What if she was using this whole thing to turn the HOA against me? Could I trust the HOA to back me up, or had I just opened the door for Karen to retaliate in ways I couldn't even imagine? I wasn't sure yet, but I wasn't backing down. The question is, do you think I made the right move, or have I just given Karen the chance to take me down? The day of the HOA meeting finally arrived. I woke up with a strange sense of calm. Most people would have been nervous, maybe even a little scared, but not me. This was my chance to take Karen down once and for all. She thought she had all the power. She thought she was untouchable. But what she didn't realize was that I had just as much control, if not more. I got dressed in a way that was casual but professional, just the right mix of approachable and serious. I wasn't here to play games. I wasn't here to make friends. I was here to take Karen down. I arrived at the HOA building early, wanting to make sure I had plenty of time to prepare. The atmosphere in the room was tense, like a group of people waiting for a bomb to drop. Karen was already there, of course, sitting in her usual spot at the head of the table. Her cold, calculating eyes met mine when I walked in. Her smile was gone. Instead, she stared at me with that look she always had when she was about to put someone in their place. But today was different. Today, it was her turn to get a taste of her own medicine. I took a seat across from her, making sure to keep my gaze steady. The other board members were looking between us, sensing the tension in the air. "I trust we're all here to discuss the recent events at the pool," Karen said, her voice smooth but filled with an undercurrent of anger. I nodded, leaning back in my chair. "That's right. I think it's time we discussed your role in that pool party, and what happened afterwards." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" she asked, her tone dripping with disbelief. "Your pool party. You know, the one you threw at my house without permission," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Let's talk about how you violated several HOA rules and tried to manipulate the situation to your advantage." The room went silent. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "I think it's clear who's been breaking the rules here, Karen. I've already sent an email to the HOA board outlining everything that happened that night. How you pressured Mr. Jenkins into helping you tamper with the gate lock." Her face turned white. You did what?" she stammered, clearly thrown off. I didn't let her recover. "I've also taken the liberty of documenting the violations you've committed over the past few months. Fines you've given out unfairly, rules you've bent and broken to suit your needs, and don't even get me started on the way you've been treating the neighbors." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She was trying to hold it together, but I could see the cracks forming. The other board members were silent, but I could tell they were listening. They were watching. I had them right where I wanted them. This isn't how the HOA is supposed to work, I continued. We're supposed to be a community, but all you've done is use your position to make everyone miserable. You've abused your power, Karen, and I think it's time we put an end to it. Karen's face twitched, stead with rage, but she tried to keep her voice steady. You think you can just walk in here and turn everything upside down? She sneered. You think you have the right to challenge me? I stood up slowly, my eyes never leaving hers. Yes, I said, my voice calm but firm. I do. And I'm not backing down. The truth is, Karen, you've made this personal. You've made it about control. But today, I'm taking that control back. I turned to the other board members. You all know what she's been doing. You've seen the way she treats people. Are you really going to let her continue running this neighborhood like it's her kingdom? There was a pause, and then one of the other board members spoke up. I've heard enough, he said, his voice surprisingly strong. I agree with the points made here. The way Karen has been handling things, well, it's not how the HOA is supposed to function. I think we need to make a change. Karen's face twisted in anger, but it was too late. The board was turning on her. One by one, the other members began to nod in agreement until they were all on my side. Karen's grip on the meeting, on the HOA, was slipping fast, but she wasn't done yet. You can't do this, she spat, her voice trembling. You're making a mistake. You don't know who you're dealing with. I think I do, I said, my voice cold. And I'm not scared of you anymore. Karen shot me a venomous look, but deep down, I knew she'd lost. The vote was called. And when the results came in, Karen's reign as HOA president was over. She didn't speak a word. She just stood up, grabbed her things, and left the room, her shoulders slumped, her pride shattered. The rest of us sat in stunned silence for a moment. The tension that had been hanging in the air for so long finally dissipated. It was over. But as I stood there, watching her leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done with me yet. She was humiliated, yes. Her power had been stripped away. But someone like her? Someone who thought they could control everyone? They don't just go down without a fight. I had won the battle, but the war wasn't over. The question is, do you think Karen will quietly accept her defeat? Or is she planning something even worse behind the scenes? It had been a few days since Karen's fall from grace, and the neighborhood felt different. The air was lighter, like a heavy weight had been lifted. For the first time in months, I could walk through the neighborhood without feeling that looming sense of dread. Karen's reign had come to an end, and everyone seemed to breathe a little easier. But I knew better. It was too quiet. I was waiting for the storm to hit. And hit it did. I was sitting in my living room enjoying the peace when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside my window. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Karen. I stood up, a sense of calm creeping over me. I had won the battle, but I knew she wouldn't go down without one last attempt at revenge. I walked to the door and opened it slowly. There she was, standing at the end of my driveway. Her posture was stiff, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't fuming either. She was planning. I couldn't help but notice how different she looked now. Gone was the self-assured Karen who would walk into any room like she owned the place. This Karen looked broken. She stood there for a moment, just staring at me. "Can I help you?" I asked, my tone cold but calm. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she just glared at me. "You think this is over?" she asked, her voice shaking with barely contained anger. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, it's over, all right. You lost," I said, my words deliberate. Her eyes narrowed, and she took a step forward. "You don't know who you're dealing with," she said, her voice low and menacing. "You think I'm just going to walk away? That you've won?" I met her gaze. "I'm not the one who's walking away. You are. You lost your position as HOA president. The board made that very clear." Karen clenched her fists. "I'm not done," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "You think I've forgotten everything you've done? This isn't over. Not by a long shot." I wasn't sure what to make of her words, but one thing was clear. She wasn't finished, and whatever plan she had was about to unfold. "Whatever you're planning," I said, my voice steady, "just know this. I'm ready for it." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned on her heel and stormed away, disappearing down the street with that same stiff, determined walk she always had. But this time, it was different. She was walking away because she knew she had lost, or so I thought. The very next day, I received an email. The subject line read, "Urgent, HOA legal action." I didn't even need to open it to know who it was from. Karen. I opened the email and began reading. In it, she claimed that I had violated several more HOA rules during the last few months, none of which were true. She made up a series of wild accusations, from minor infractions about my lawn to more serious ones about tampering with community property. It was a ridiculous list of things that had never happened, but Karen had a way of twisting the truth. She even included a threat, saying that if I didn't agree to meet with the HOA board and discuss the situation, she would take legal action. I couldn't believe it. I sat there for a moment, reading and rereading the email, making sure I hadn't missed anything. She was coming at me again, this time with the full force of the HOA and possibly a lawyer. I wasn't going to let her win again. I immediately drafted a response, staying calm and collected. I pointed out the flaws in her claims, calmly rebutting every accusation. I also mentioned the recent vote that had removed her from her position as president. And then, just to add a little extra weight to my argument, I mentioned that I had saved a copy of her original email from when she tried to manipulate the pool party situation. That was my trump card. I hit send and leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. I had just made it clear that I wasn't going to let her push me around. But as I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another petty attack. This was bigger. Karen had power. She had always had it. And while she was no longer the HOA president, she still had a lot of influence. Was she playing a bigger game now? Was she trying to turn the tables and use the board against me? I had no answers. But I had one thing on my side. I had the truth. And I was willing to fight for it. The question is, do you think Karen is really finished, or do you think this is just the beginning of a much bigger battle? I knew Karen wasn't going to let this go. The minute I hit send on that email, I felt the weight of the storm that was about to hit. I had exposed her lies. I had stood up to her power. And now I had become her #1 target. But here's the thing. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I'd already faced her down once, and I'd come out victorious. Now I wasn't just protecting my property. I was protecting my reputation, my right to live peacefully in this neighborhood without being bullied by someone who thought they had all the power. I couldn't let Karen's desperate attacks slide. The next day, I received another email from her. But this one was different. Instead of another hollow threat or a series of lies, this email contained something much more serious. It was from her lawyer. I leaned back in my chair and opened the email. The legal jargon was overwhelming at first, but one line stuck out like a neon sign. "We are filing a formal lawsuit against you for harassment and property damage. My stomach dropped. A lawsuit? For what? I had done nothing but defend myself, and yet here she was, trying to take me to court. She was throwing the full weight of her resources behind a legal attack that I wasn't prepared for. The email went on to list accusations, none of which made sense. There was talk about harassment during the HOA meeting, claims about my unwarranted actions during the pool party, and even more fabricated nonsense about endangering the neighborhood by locking the gate. I was furious. How could she do this? How could she lie so blatantly after everything she had done? But as I sat there, reading her lawyer's email over and over again, something clicked. This wasn't just about the pool. This wasn't about petty revenge. This was about power. Karen had tried to control the neighborhood for so long, and now, in her desperation, she was trying to control me. But she wasn't going to win. I was going to fight back. I immediately got in touch with my own lawyer, explaining the situation. I sent over all the evidence I had, screenshots of the emails, the notes from the HOA meeting, and the pictures of the broken lock. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. My lawyer agreed with me. We had a strong case. Karen's accusations were baseless, and it was clear to both of us that she was simply trying to intimidate me. But this wasn't just about winning the legal battle. It was about showing Karen that she couldn't control me anymore. The next few days were filled with meetings, paperwork, and phone calls. I was preparing myself for the fight of a lifetime. And as I walked into the courtroom for the first time, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was it. This was my chance to end Karen's reign of terror once and for all. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone she had wronged. The courtroom was packed. Karen was sitting at her lawyer's table, a smug look on her face. She thought she had this in the bag, but what she didn't know was that I had already anticipated her every move. The trial began, and as the evidence was presented, it quickly became clear that Karen's case was falling apart. My lawyer tore through her accusations like they were paper. First, we exposed the fact that the HOA had never actually made any official complaints against me. The pool party? Karen had organized it herself without any permission. The damage she claimed I caused? Nothing more than her overreaction to a locked gate. The more we dug, the more her case crumbled. Karen was sweating now. I could see the frustration in her eyes as my lawyer methodically dismantled her entire argument. Every lie she'd told, every manipulation she'd tried to pull was being revealed for what it really was. Nothing but a power grab. It wasn't just a courtroom victory. It was a victory for everyone she had bullied. But just as I thought the battle was won, Karen made one last desperate move. She stood up, her voice shaking, but loud. "You don't understand," she screamed. "I'm doing this for the community. I'm trying to protect this neighborhood from people like him." The courtroom fell silent. But before she could say another word, my lawyer stood up, a calm smile on his face. "Your Honor," he said, "I'd like to remind the court that we're not here to discuss what Karen thinks is best for the community. We're here to address the fact that she has repeatedly abused her position for personal gain." That was it. Karen's facade crumbled completely. She had no defense left. The judge's gavel slammed down. Case dismissed. I had won. Karen's face was a mix of shock, humiliation, and anger. She didn't say a word as she stood up and walked out of the courtroom, her head low. But the damage had already been done. The truth had come out, and Karen's reign of terror was officially over. As I walked out of the courtroom, a wave of relief washed over me. I had fought back, and I had won. But the question is, do you think Karen will accept her defeat Or do you think she's plotting her next move?